This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. And I am really excited to welcome to our guest, to you, our audience and our community today, a guest who I've been having a wonderful time getting to know off camera. And I'm really looking forward to our topic today. It's a topic we've never actually talked about on the podcast, despite having over 150 episodes over the last couple of years. So this is Matthew MacLachlan, and he is the Head of Learning and Innovation at Country Navigator. Welcome to you today, Matthew. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Leisha. Very well indeed, thank you. And it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So there'll be lots of people that won't know at all what you do and what your business does. So for the sake of them understanding a little bit as a headline, what is Country Navigator and what do you actually do?
Yeah, it's. I'll give you the technical name first. We are cultural intelligence and inclusion specialists. We provide learning solutions, both digital and live to organizations around the world to help them be more culturally intelligent, particularly in international, working across cultural borders, but focusing a lot on inclusion as well. Obviously very hot topics at the moment, but we've been doing it for about 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a very hot topic at the moment. So without sounding stupid, just explain to me what cultural intelligence actually means, because I think we talk about culture all the time in recruitment. So what exactly does that, because it's CQ, isn't it? That's what you...
Yeah, so CQ. I mean, it's very similar in many ways to EQ, emotional intelligence. But cultural intelligence is very much that set of skills and competencies that enables you to understand the cultural background, the cultural preferences and styles of another person, and then find ways to work effectively together as a team. We're very keen to differentiate between culture and country.
Yeah.
Quite often they're treated as synonyms. We see culture as much more complex than that. So it's everything that makes you up, all the little influences, your experiences, your backgrounds. So particularly, I mean, for recruitment, I guess it's absolutely crucial to be able to understand your candidate's culture, what their work approaches are, what their styles are, to help them get into the right position, or more importantly, help the companies you're working with recruit the right people.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And I think, that's really the distinct difference of where I've seen the industry totally transform from being, almost we've all managed these little microcosms of kind of regionalized, where culturally, it's probably, I don't want to say easier to understand a business and what a person is coming from, but actually the world is we're totally globalized now. And that's also been, I guess another layer of that is the fact that very often a lot of our listeners and our community will be working remotely. So, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different layers. I've got my brain's going off here in terms of all the things I want to ask you. So let's bring it back to one of the things on your profile on LinkedIn, which I thought was a great profile on LinkedIn, by the way, is that you quote here that learning must change behaviour. So, I mean, I think in recruitment, there are some traits that we clearly need to do better. If we think about the evolution of a recruitment consultant typically. So I just want to talk about that first of all, in terms of behavioural traits and why, if we're all here to learn, ultimately that's why people listen to podcasts. Why do we need to change our behaviours or look at our behaviours? And then on another level, how we can then achieve true inclusivity when we're thinking about how we're impacting other people with our behaviour.
So those are two questions that I could probably take 12 months to answer.
We don't have that long. Gosh.
So I don't know how patient your listeners are, but to deal with the first one first, the why, and I think it's actually relevant to your listeners in terms of the time they're investing. If learning is just a nice way to spend 30 minutes, then you shouldn't be doing it at work. Frankly, it shouldn't be part of your work. And if learning doesn't change your behavior, then the only thing that you're evaluating that time on is, did I enjoy it? And we have to enjoy work, obviously. But learning is about making us better as people, making us better at our jobs, help us to interact better with people. And if you, it's one of the huge criticisms of dry diversity e-learning courses is that they spend a lot of time telling you about the 27 definitions of unconscious bias and the 400 different types of microaggressions, but they don't actually tell you how to do anything about it. And so I very, very firmly believe that if I've got a client in front of me and I've probably only got 30 minutes to persuade them to buy my product, I want them to believe and to know that our goal is to change the behavior of the people in their organization, obviously for the better.
Absolutely. And obviously in terms of what we do as recruiters, we're not dealing with products, we're dealing with a service. Technically that product is a person. Yes. So, so actually this is a really important part of our mindset, isn't it? Because the sort of traits and behaviors that we have as recruiters, well, so do those individuals that we're placing as candidates and our clients. So it's just, there's different echelons to it, I suppose. That's very succinctly put, because I imagine that's not even the tip of the iceberg, given
absolutely not.
It's a very complex. So I think that a lot of this will come down to mindset, won't it? That people that are choosing to take the 20-30 minutes to listen to any podcast, they see that as their self-development, part of their learning experience. And those that choose not to, or maybe have other areas, maybe they just feel that they don't need to change their behaviour. So you're always going to get those with maybe closed mindsets, possibly.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's why the heart of cultural intelligence is self-awareness. It's understanding yourself and your own approach. Our entire tool at Country Navigator is built around a cultural profiling tool that allows people to understand how those cultural differences within themselves manifest in their attitude to task or relationship, or their attitude to time, for example, or hierarchy. And understanding yourself, I can't remember, I think it was Plato or Aristotle who said, "Student, know thyself first." In other words, if you know yourself, then you're in a position to learn. You're in a position to learn and in a position to understand other people much, much better.
So when you're partnering your clients, and obviously these will be employers, I imagine, of every sort of distinction, not
Absolutely.
just recruitment, those people that are choosing to assess their culture, to enhance their culture, presumably to attract and retain the best talent, those leaders will be self-aware enough. I think self-awareness doesn't get talked about enough. So how do we know if we're self-aware?
I suppose if you know you need to learn something, if you know you need to be better, then you're on the path to self-awareness. And if we take it out of the business context for a second, we are all aware of friends or acquaintances who we consider arrogant.
Yeah.
And to me, arrogance is the absence of self-awareness. Arrogance says, I am the best at what I do. I don't need to learn from anybody. Fortunately, there aren't very many people like that.
No.
If you recognize that you need to learn, if you recognize there are things you can do better, you've started that path of self-awareness.
So there's an element of humility there, isn't there? That, we can't always know everything about everything. I think you're right. I think there's again this kind of stereotypical, very misconception that recruiters are this arrogant, bombastic, bullish, I know everything and I'm going to, but actually most people you actually engage with are on a continual journey of self-development, awareness, learning. And I'm a huge cheerleader that's what I think most of the recruitment industry represents. And it's our role to ensure that that's how our clients see us too. Gosh, this is just an absolute minefield. It really is.
Well, I could have done with a decent recruiter a couple of years ago. I was hiring someone to join my team.
Right.
I don't necessarily associate age with experience or anything at all. They were straight out of university, quite young. And the whole interview, they told me how brilliant they were and how they were going to change my business.
Wow.
And I thought, we want you to change our business, but actually, I need you to learn. I've been doing this for 25 years. I know a little bit about it. I need you to learn. Yes, I need your fresh enthusiasm and your insight. But if you're not open to learning, then, and we didn't hire that person, we took someone who was much less qualified, much less confident, much less ready, but investing in them actually paid dividends. I've got a brilliant team now.
No, but that kind of proves the point about culture, doesn't it? So I want to go back to culture. So cultural intelligence. So obviously we hire in recruitment. I'm talking as recruitment here. We hire for our industry, for recruitment industry, based on culture fit. That's, I've been doing recruitment for 20 years. So how do we truly know whether somebody we're hiring is the right cultural fit based on cultural intelligence, and that we're not hiring them for the wrong reasons. And I mean, this is the biggest question I could ever ask anybody about our industry, because it is the most talked about topic when it comes to me partnering recruitment firms.
Before I answer the question directly, can I challenge you on cultural fit?
Yes.
So cultural fit for me is extremely controversial.
Okay.
What cultural fit says is that I want to hire someone who looks like me, sounds like me, behaves like me, thinks like me, and that'll destroy your business.
Yep.
I don't want to say you want to hire people who don't fit culturally.
Yeah.
But if you're hiring identikit people, if you're hiring people who are cut out of a mold by a cookie cutter, then you might as well just clone yourself. I mean, technology is not quite there yet, but you're not getting those fresh insights, those fresh ideas. I posted on LinkedIn recently a post that really resonated with people. I want people to disagree with me. I want someone who does things differently. Just as a very simple example, I am extremely disorganized. I have project management tools, I have planners, I have lists all over the place. It means I'm quite agile. It means if something comes up urgently, I can get onto it straight away.
Yeah.
But one of my team members, Tanya, who won't forgive me for mentioning her name, she is extremely organized. She's absolutely brilliant at keeping projects on track. Yeah. Without her, I suspect we wouldn't ever deliver something. Now, if we'd hired for cultural fit, we'd have a whole team of Tanyas and everything would go exactly according to plan, but no ability to flex to a different situation. Yeah. If we hired everybody like me, we'd be bust in a couple of weeks' time because we'd never deliver anything. So I think it's really important that yes, we have this concept of cultural fit. We don't want people who are going to disrupt too much. But I'm always nervous when people say we hire specifically on cultural fit.
I've got a confession to make. That was a bit of a contrived question. I'm just so pleased because I've been, unbeknownst to me, I've actually probably been quite woke for a very long time because I've always challenged that expression. Yeah. Because otherwise all you're doing is replicating clones, and I can't imagine a world of leashes, an office full of leashes. That the concept of cultural blend or cultural add to me is much more realistic. It truly being inclusive in how you're hiring. I'm going to give an example, and I'm going to embarrass somebody now who is actually the producer of this podcast, Shannon Rowlands. We have got a lot of similarities in our mindset, in our values, but in terms of behaviours, you'll never see her doing this on, she's the woman behind it. You asked me to go and actually then produce this podcast, I wouldn't know where to start. Yeah. So, like you, I'm the creator. I'm quite disorganised, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that's probably had the wrong interview time put in their diary, but I know I'm good at what I do. Yeah. When Shannon came to me, I saw this very different kind of personality in this different person, but was unique to herself. Yeah. But I could see what she would add to my business. And that's what I always challenge my hiring companies, my employees, my clients effectively. When you say culture fit, what do you actually mean? Because the reality is, if you're just a load of mid-20s to mid-30s white men in your tight trousers, looking like Wolf of Wall Street, that's all you will ever be. Yeah. If you are looking for true diversity and you want to bring in the right talent, what are you doing around gender? Yeah. We need to address these gaps. So I'm sorry I kind of
No, absolutely. And I think you've actually mentioned the key word there, values. And I think every organization has two sets of values. You have the values that the marketing department have thought are brilliant and they put on the website.
Or on the wall.
Absolutely. And then you have the values that are the lived values of your business. Yeah. And those are the ones you should be recruiting for. Yeah. If I didn't believe in cultural intelligence and inclusion, even if I had PhDs, and I don't have a PhD, even if I had PhDs and 30 years experience and I wrote the best training ever, I would be the wrong fit for Country Navigator. I have to believe in the product. I have to believe that the work I do is changing behaviors. And I think particularly in the world of inclusion, there's nothing worse than someone who churns stuff out without actually believing in it.
I agree.
think of Ian Duncan Smith. No, sorry, I mustn't say that. But think of a right-wing politician, extreme right-wing politician, writing inclusion programs, and you know that they may be very good at what they do. They may be absolutely excellent at creating learning experiences, but if they don't believe in it, they don't want people to change their behaviours.
No, they don't. And actually, and this is why I had to ask you, because obviously you are the expert, and you've got a brilliant objective perspective of what's actually happening, and then educating people on it. But from my point of view, obviously, why do people leave companies? Why do people actually leave jobs? It doesn't matter whether you're recruiting recruiters, whether you're recruiting chefs. You leave a company because you don't believe in their value system. Whether it's you leaving a bad leader, you've not been treated well, you've not been allowed to go flexible, whatever it is, what it boils down to, the fundamental reason is you don't match on values. So therefore, we will conclude, I'm sure, and you can give us some ideas how to make sure we are assessing this. We have to hire on values, and that's what the cultural intelligence piece means. So based on that, I explained to you off camera, our listeners, you listening now, you've probably sat there wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. We're so grateful. We call you an aspiring leader, or you're already a leader, or you're somebody that's probably starting your career or working through your consultancy, piece, which is fantastic. How are you going to make sure you're matching up to a candidate to a company value? So what advice can you give to our listeners?
Well, interestingly enough, I think you've asked the question already, Leisha. I think when you're talking particularly about values, you really need to ask, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
And what behaviours do you believe represent that value?
Okay.
So for example, within our business, in the learning business, I need to be able to challenge accepted truths. I need to be able to say no to power. I need to be able to say to people, this is the better way of doing it. I need to be able to talk to a client and say, the way you're doing things is not going to lead to better leadership. And in my behaviours, I have to be able to demonstrate that I can do that in a humble way. I need to do that in a way that isn't going to really annoy the hell out of the account managers who are running that account, because they need to make their sales targets. So it's actually probing into, if you have the value of respect for others, fantastic. What does that mean in your behaviours?
Yeah.
And for me, that's a really, really good question. Don't say, give me an example of when you've shown respect to someone else. Because I can invent that. I mean, I have in a previous life coached people for career development and for interviews, and I can give anybody a set of answers that will get them through a competency-based interview. Yeah. But actually, if you start probing what behaviours in you show that you do demonstrate respect to others, and how does that affect them? How does that come out in reality? And I think that's where cultural intelligence can come in really, really valuable, because you've got the self-awareness to know what your behaviours are, and then the cultural intelligence helps you to understand that respect is shown in different ways by different people. I've been doing some work with people who are hosting Ukrainian refugees.
Right.
And respect and politeness is really, really important. If you have a guest in your home, you expect them to be sort of respectful of your behaviours. One of the biggest things that the hosts have said to me is that some of these Ukrainians are just so rude. They don't say please or thank you. They don't ask. They don't. Their children just go and get stuff. That's not rudeness. That is the fact that within the Ukrainian language, please and thank you are just used less frequently. Politeness is shown in a different way. The way children are brought up is, if they're hungry, they go to the fridge and get food. And so it's really important that when you're asking someone to show the behaviours that correspond to a value, that you recognise that their cultural influences, their cultural background will influence how those behaviours manifest, how they come out.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And just as a total aside, for anybody that's hosted a Ukrainian family or refugees, just thank you for doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, absolute heroes.
All human beings, just to be so generous. And let's hope that, the conflict at some point ends for these families and they can be reunited. But that's a total aside. So I want to go back to something that you just covered on there, but actually links right back to the start of the podcast where we talked about the globalization of the world and how, there'll be lots of our listeners now that are listening, possibly in the UK, possibly America or wherever you are, that have teams that are working remotely or in other locations. So how do we ensure if we think about, again, the job as a recruiter is to kind of unite a candidate with a company's culture. Yeah. How do we ensure that, somebody that's working remotely can be part of a culture if they're remote?
Yeah, it's really, really tough. It's really, really tough. And once someone's been hired, that induction process is absolutely essential. I mean, there's practical things. I mean, I think one of the most effective ones I've seen is almost a rotating buddy system. So, so during COVID, we a lot of us did coffee lottos, where you draw a name out of a hat and you have a virtual coffee with someone you've never met in your organization. But I think you do something with a new starter. You do something similar. It's all very well to have a buddy who's assigned to look after you. What normally happens, and I hope none of my previous employers are listening, what normally happens is the person who's not very good at their job gets assigned to be the buddy because they're the one who's got the most time.
Wow. Okay.
And so what happens is your new employee gets stuck with the most demotivated person in the office to show them around or in the team. So I think what you do is you rotate. So 2 or 3 people, 4 or 5 people in depending on the size of the team, just spend maybe a couple of hours a week for the first. So one person spends 2 hours on 2 separate occasions in the first week, a different person in week 2, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Get them to feel welcomed, and they'll be introduced to what that person does, but also socially get to know them. Not everyone is comfortable sharing everything about their personal life, but we do as humans crave relationship. Yeah, we have to feel belonging, and if we don't belong, we'll go somewhere where we do.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased that I asked you that question, because I think it's going to resonate with. I always say if one listener learns from that, I think that is absolutely vital. I think that sense of belonging, I think that's something that we all really missed and craved during our horrendous lockdowns in 2020. And I think that's why hopefully as we sort of continue to flourish in 2023 and beyond, that's something that we could environment. I like the thought of that rotating buddy scheme, and I don't see why that couldn't work in in the real life situation in an office, that actually this kind of premise that you sort of, whether you've got a leader or whoever it might be that's mentoring you, actually it's a really nice way to get to know the business in a broader context, and you don't need to be sat there talking about your sex life or anything like that. It can just whatever feels safe.
Yeah.
That's truly inclusive. Well, we've got so much here. Yeah. So in terms of obviously what you're seeing in your client base, what do you think we can learn from, I guess, the best practice around cultural intelligence and this concept of culture ad that we can then, because I think that the recruitment industry is an educator. We are going out into we're a multi-billion dollar sector. We're educating our end users. What can we be doing to educate our end user clients in terms of cultural intelligence?
So the most common meeting or phone call I have with customers is where I'm doing some kind of needs analysis. I'm trying to find out what their situation is. And generally one of the first questions I ask, so tell me about your team culture. And then there's this really, really embarrassed silence.
Oh, okay.
Because people don't have the ability to describe their culture because they've never really thought about it. And I think one of the real challenges for a leader or a team manager or any kind of supervisor is to actually think about and discuss with your team what the culture is. A culture will form whatever you do. If you don't intentionally create a culture, you'll have a culture.
Yeah.
And most often, if you don't do anything about it, it'll be a poor culture. It'll be a toxic culture. It'll be a culture where people are afraid to be themselves, where they're unable to share themselves. And you'll notice that because people will leave. People won't hang around. Mm-hmm. If you actually talk about your culture, you have the ability then to engage everybody in sharing how they work best, how they want to work, how they communicate more effectively. So again, we in a team I was working with again during COVID lockdown, there was a Muslim lady in my team who refused to put her camera on during team meetings. We'd known her; she was really outgoing, really open, really friendly, but she just would not put her camera on. But we talked about culture. We were a team that were able to talk about culture, and she was able to say, "Well, look, I wouldn't invite strange men into my home when my husband's not here."
Yeah.
And so why would I put my camera on when he's not here?
Yeah.
And I completely understood. Now,
yeah,
it's not necessarily about being a Muslim. It's not necessarily being about a woman at home. But the fact is, by talking about what she was comfortable with, it was no longer an issue.
No, absolutely.
So rather than the team resenting her, everyone was, "Oh, that's really interesting. Tell us about it. Tell us what," because we didn't know that she was a practicing Muslim. So she actually got to talk about her faith with the team.
Oh, fabulous!
Which was a really great way. Now, we needed to make sure that we weren't putting her on the spot. We weren't making her feel uncomfortable about it. But she was able to, I think, to be able to do that because we were comfortable talking about cultures. And I think a lot of people, Helmut Goering, one of those wonderful people you should never ever use as a role model, once said that when I hear the word culture, I reach for my pistol. But actually, that's typical of a really bad leader. We need to be talking about culture. We can't be afraid of culture.
No, absolutely. And just listening to you there and the example of that lady in particular, it's all about communication, isn't it? That's what it comes down to. And actually, you can't dictate your culture. You have to get feedback as a leader on what does our culture mean. And it all stems back to the values and the why. And I think it's a really lovely way to finish the podcast, because I think that's something that we can all take from that if we communicate better to each other, we make each other feel safer.
Absolutely. Business is communication. And if you don't communicate, you don't have a business, you don't have relationships. So I think absolutely right. Everything is about communication.
Definitely. Well, it's been so insightful. God, we could have literally talked for about 12 months. We've done it very succinctly for our audience. And we're really grateful for you joining us today, Matthew, on the Recruitment Podcast.
Thank you very much.